Welcome to a very special edition of the ThinkData Podcast. Today I'm joined by Cal. He is a long-term friend of the show and actually a returning guest. I had the pleasure of meeting and interviewing him in person, I think back end of 2022, just ahead of the AI Summit, where he was actually one of the main speakers there. Cal has a really interesting background because he obviously has a wealth of experience in this data and AI space. He was actually the founder of Pandata. They were a specialist AI and machine learning consultancy, which was actually went through an acquisition by a company called Further back in March of last year. He now serves as their head of AI and data science, and basically his focus and the organization he works for, they really help organizations unlock real value from AI. I've known each other for a while, and actually when we spoke, what I wanted this episode to focus on, amongst other things, is really diving into the current state of AI. You know, there's so much talk, and whether it's hype, whether it's disruption, and at the associated ripple effects across data analytics as a broader ecosystem. So yeah, Cal, great to have you on. And I know we kind of just joked, first time in a month you're not on a plane, so we kind of managed to lock this down. But yeah, as I briefly alluded to, do you mind bringing people up to speed on kind of that journey post Further and kind of how that role has evolved?
For sure. So this is home base for me, so I love getting to be here. But it's been like a fascinating journey. I mean, even when we met, it was just after ChatGPT had hit the market.
Yeah.
And over the last 2.5 years and change, enterprises have had to grapple with what are we doing with AI. Our definition of what an AI project is has quickly morphed from, well, it's just statistics on steroid, to now we have these personal productivity tools. And for any leader in the space in charge of running a function that's delivering these AI projects, there's a lot of education that I've gone through as well, just in
Mm.
terms of reacquainting myself with customer expectations. I teach this class 3 times a year, where I do AI strategy and communication for executives as a part of an executive MBA program. And I've been doing that since 2021. And since ChatGPT launched, just the number of individuals who are you using AI day to day has
Mm.
gone up dramatically each time I come back to do this class, to the point where 18 months ago I had to start asking, what percent of your work are you using generative AI for?
Yeah.
So it's crazy to me how quickly the workforce has changed. But along with that, I think that there's a lot of these incorrect perceptions of what AI can or can't do that are starting to permeate. And that's been, frankly, one of the biggest challenges
Yeah.
that I face on a regular basis in this role.
Yeah, it's really interesting you touch on that because I think obviously when we spoke and met in person and the AI summit, it was 99% around AI. And actually now, if you look at organizations, I know Further in that kind of, they consult organizations specifically around unlocking value. But in your kind of opinion, and this doesn't necessarily need to be tied to Further or not, where do you think we are in terms of the journey of hype and because there's so many startups spinning up every 5 minutes, so how are we managing to tell what is hype and what is meaningful disruption?
So I have been obsessed with the fact that AI projects, since we've been doing AI in the enterprise, have had such a high rate of failure. Anywhere from 80 to 90% of these initiatives fail to return value. And that
Wow.
was true 5 years ago. That is still true today. I was just looking up the latest statistics on this. And in fact, I think 40 some percent of enterprise AI projects have been abandoned in this year. And there's a greater abandonment of these projects this year than there was even last year, despite evolving capabilities. And I anecdotally see this in practice. The one guarantee you get with AI systems is that they're going to be wrong some amount of the time. It doesn't matter if you're doing categorize this document or predict the next word or summarize this document. If we're doing things with generative AI, there's an inherent error rate. And so what I tell clients all the time is AI isn't about getting models that are perfect. Designing AI systems is about a couple of levers. The first is how wrong are you willing to be? And
It's an
you
interesting
know
way to
what?
look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How wrong are you willing to be? And what are you willing to do about that? What's the cost of making a mistake? And so you're really the design and deployment of an AI system is this act of error management and exception management.
Yeah, it's an interesting take, and I'm fascinated by that figure because I was speaking to someone a couple of years back who'd been brought into an organization, and the mandate was to replace their content team, which they're about 2.5 to 3,000 content writers. He was brought in, came from one of the large big tech companies, and was there for 2 months, laid out the cost, and was effectively let go because they didn't even understand. I know the cost of productionizing AI is becoming cheaper, but they hadn't really got their head around the sheer cost and investment. So in your experience, if you had what's the most common reason they're failing? Is it cost? Is it misconception? Is it talent? What is it?
So, two things. One, we have a really hard time understanding how a solution is going to generalize. I'll come
Yeah.
back to that. But two, in my experience, it's an underestimation of the total cost of ownership. So, let's talk about this content management example. If you're really going to build an automated content pipeline, and by the way, one of my engineers who often does talks on AI has built an agentic workflow that goes through his decks and analyzes it for information that needs to be updated. And for him,
Wow.
it absolutely works because he does this very technical training. He teaches a handful of methods. And I was blown away by this use case. So, yes, you can, in fact, use AI tools in content analysis and generation, but it also requires active input from an end user and
Mm,
interpretation. And you're not automating everything. Maybe you're automating parts of what information you're gathering before you synthesize. Then you make an expert determination of here are the things that I want to include. You're spending time, for example, on curating style guides and examples of effective writing. And I'm
mm,
just using this example, this content creation example, but there's a lot of this human led effort that's not cheap. That's
yeah.
the expensive part of any investment. And a lot of enterprises go into these thinking, okay, we spent all of this money on the AI so that we can avoid these costs. And then they're shocked that, wait, there's overhead on top of that. Well, maybe it wasn't worth the investment in the AI to begin with.
Yeah, interesting. Because people do forget that, obviously I'm in the talent game where AI is not just your silver bullet to solving problems. You still need people to manage it. And on your point earlier, how wrong do you want to be? You need to people make sure, and in business critical and also life critical, look at healthcare, how wrong can you be? Well, not that wrong. We need to be ensure we're not. So if you're going into organizations now and you're looking at they come to you saying, look, I know we need to go with AI. We're seeing some bottlenecks here, or we're trying to increase revenue here. What's probably the first thing you look at?
So I try to understand what their humans are doing today.
Mm,
It's often trying to understand what's the bottleneck to scale and what is it that humans are routinely doing that's slowing them down. And then I try to understand, is there general best practice in place? Does the organization have a clear way of evaluating performance? Do they have examples that they can point to of humans that perform better than other humans, for example? And what you're trying to characterize here is there consistency? Is there a pattern that can be learned from? And is there merit in being able to streamline parts or facets of a task? And
mm,
then after that, what we're trying to do is also understand, well, if you did all of that, what happens with the balance of time? Is it truly something where now these individuals are taking the time they've saved and they're doing more of the task?
mm.
Or does it have a different impact? Is it increasing customer conversions? Is it increasing satisfaction? Is it accelerating the time to market, for example? So for me, the biggest value proposition on coding agents isn't necessarily spend less time coding, it's ship product faster.
Yeah.
And I find that a lot of organizations haven't gone through the exercise of really trying to pinpoint what's the value proposition of the AI investment in this particular problem space. It's
Yeah.
very easy to reach for. We're going to save time. Great. One, there's only so much time you can cut, and two, I guarantee you these people are going to find other things to do with their time, and there's only so many jobs you can start to eliminate before you start putting stress on other jobs. So cutting, in my mind, isn't necessarily the winning value proposition, yet we keep coming back to time savings as the value prop.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think obviously a lot of people at the moment look at this AI, the hype train or the journey we're on, and actually one of the big thing we've seen, yes, time's definitely a thing they're trying to save. So in their eyes, it frees other people up to do better work. But we have all ultimately seen a huge displacement of the workforce. And it's beginning to happen more. And I think no more have we seen that in kind of the old quintessential data and analytics. You know, if you look at those kind of how those teams have staffed previously, the last 12, 18 months, as a recruiter in this space, we've seen the largest increase in layoffs and the biggest drop in vacancies that I've ever seen. What do you think is driving that shift? I know you touch about kind of AI saves time, but equally, does it just happen to coincide with the fact that the economy isn't great, or is AI actually playing a really big part in that displacement?
I think executive excitement is maybe playing a part here too. There's this
Okay.
expectations, and there's a story that happened recently where we had a client get ask about a research prototype that Google had showcased. You could basically take a picture of any product, and it would show you what that shirt or that pant would look like on a model. And really exciting stuff, like being able to say, what would this look like on me or on a picture of me, and maybe help with the shopping experience. This wasn't yet something, it's now an app that Google has, and it's now in the public domain. But at that time, it was just research. And we had an executive say, well, we showed this to the client. Let's figure out what it would take to build this out for them. And so my response was, it can't be done. Not that it was impossible, but it's a research prototype. We're in the business of translating solutions into like enterprise day-to-day workflow. We're not a research lab. We're not trying to solve the cutting edge and figure out how to use foundation models to generate renderings of images in a very specific way. That's just not a problem we're scoped to build. And I had another team member who's really trying to be helpful use Google Veo, their video generation model, and gave it a picture of a model wearing a piece of clothing and said animate it. And so of course Veo creates an animation.
Okay.
And this model turns around and everybody goes, wow, that's really cool. Why don't we just pitch this to the client? And I had to stop and say, yes, it did, in fact, create an animation of what was still, and it showed motion, but it wasn't controllable. We didn't have a 3D model that we could rotate. We didn't have an icon that was true to body fit. What we had was one probabilistic rendering of a single still image that happened to rotate. And we have no guarantee that it'll work on all body types, all skin tones. It's not controlling the model in the way we want to control it. And I find that that type of expectation, I saw AI do X, therefore it should be able to do Y. We haven't yet got to the point of common sense about where models excel and where they're less likely to excel.
Yeah.
Because we're used to, if a human did a 3D rendering like that, surely the human can also do other 3D renderings.
Yeah.
And so we're trained to think that way, and we're translating the way we think about human generalizability to these AI models. And I think that's part of what's driving this optimism around what AI can actually do.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If you look at kind of the staffing and, you know, how this is ultimately impacting, you know, the way that teams are built and what we've seen, and we've actually seen this shift slowly begun to happen the other way, where everyone's got on the hype train, they've made these cuts, AI can do this, and actually slowly but surely you're starting to see data engineers being rehired. You're starting to see software engineers being rehired, because ultimately, go back to your earlier point, they still need to be there to ensure the environment can run these models. And if you're bringing in, you know, the sheer amount of data that AI is generating anyway, it needs to be handled by specialists. So if you're looking at organizations that are looking to staff their data teams, what do you think are some of the most key areas within those data teams that you think that you can't go without?
I have a story for you. So
Yeah, cool.
this was
Good.
a prospect that we were working with, and they needed help. They had a heavy paper process around electronic medical records or patient medical records, and they needed to find a more effective way to pull and extract data. So document intelligence. And we were working with them to scope out a project, and then they came to us after almost starting the engagement. They said, "Hey, our board has decided to halt this project. We are now evaluating this tool, insert name of tool that does document AI." And so my team was like, bummer. And I responded to that email and I said, that's awesome. We would have been using building blocks like insert other alternative to that tool. Question for you. How are you going to move forward with the quality control facets of the engagement and really translate this solution from its AI extraction capability into your workflow? And does it have ongoing monitoring? And then they immediately responded with, oh my gosh, we didn't think about that. And so now
Yeah.
we're back at the table again because the entire time, this whole engagement was really about us. Yes, sure, we were bringing some tools and building blocks in place to help with this pipeline, but the value prop of having machine learning engineers on this project was setting up quality control and
Mm,
evaluation and understanding specifically for the task being performed, what is the efficacy of the AI model or solution being used. And so to
yeah.
answer your question, what are those dispensable skill sets today? Model evaluation, model observability, ML ops, AI ops,
Yeah.
being able to interrogate how language models drift, being able to trace agentic systems and the quagmire of data and systems that they're interfacing with. And so that, in my mind, is really where there's job growth opportunity.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I think there is a lot of, look, if you spend too much time on LinkedIn, it's doom and gloom. And I do get the market is tremendously tricky. You know, it is very hard. But what we have seen is this merging of job function. You talk about ML ops, AI ops, your data ops. You know, obviously DevOps is older, you know, in terms of it's been around for a while, but you're beginning to see people more involved in two or three job functions and they're being merged because it goes back to your point earlier. The artificial intelligence or whatever they're working with, the tooling just means they're more efficient and they can take on more responsibilities. But if you're looking at whilst the opportunity's there, and we're definitely seeing new job creations, if you're in a position now where, say, a classic data analyst or BI analyst or, you know, reporting analyst, where you know, you're thinking, oh, that's my current role, you know, I've already been laid off. What would be your advice to someone? Because there's a lot of wording and messaging saying just retrain or, you know, but it's easier said than done.
Just
But
as easy as that.
yeah, what would be your advice to me? Because people to listen to this will really take some comfort from just very honest saying, well, look, this is being disrupted, you know, and actually that you have got to move with the times, or unfortunately you are going to get left behind. But what would your advice be to them?
So one of the things, and I just had another conversation about this today, is the fact that AI literacy across the enterprise is still sorely lacking. And I give this example all the time, cats versus squirrels. And I put two groups of images up on a screen, and all the squirrels are outside, and all the cats are inside. And if you only use this to train an AI model to tell the difference between cats and squirrels, it would learn grass means squirrel. And that's
Yeah,
something that
interesting.
these analysts actually get really well. They're used to quantitative insights. They're used to understanding spurious correlations in data.
Mm,
And I would argue that these individuals are best positioned as stewards of AI tools because they know really well how data
mm,
can steer these tools wrong. And it might be a different manifestation of how they perform data quality analysis, but they have a lot of these building blocks that would actually make them really great automation engineers who might be equipped to use low code systems and low
mm.
code agentic workflow design tools to orchestrate enterprise automation.
Yeah, I love that. You know, people listening here, I think it takes some comfort from, you know, Cal knows what he's talking about. He's been at the, you know, at the forefront of this space for a number of years. And I do, from a recruiting standpoint, I still find it crazy. There is such a there's not enough talent out there to fill the opportunities, but then organizations are still making such a hash of hiring because obviously these are the first times they've hired specific, specialists. So when you're going into these companies, they say, we're going to go and hire someone to, we need an ML engineer. How should these companies approach their first hire? Are they typically relying on the likes of you and your company to sanity check that hire? Because ultimately they've never been down this path before.
I've seen mixed paths. And I was just recently talking with an enterprise that's here in Ohio. We're going to be doing a panel with their generative AI lead in the next 2 months. And he was telling me their story. They actually started internally. They found there's a DBA, a software developer, and one other professional across the enterprise that all kind of raised their hands early on this generative AI experience and said, we really are excited about this stuff. Can we learn? Can we start working? And so they provided the resources for these individuals to learn how to build with large language models. And so that was one approach. And I was really impressed by it because you now have these individuals with enterprise knowledge. They know the organization intimately. They've been around for 5, 10 plus years, some of them multiple decades. And then they provided the resources to get them up to speed. Then I've seen other enterprises learn really by bringing in external consultants. Hey, we want you to handle the net new, show us the ropes, pass it on internally. And frankly, the ones that are hiring machine learning engineers are the ones that have had established data science departments in the past.
Yeah, and I like that. I think it's sensible as well because they retain that the people who've been there for a while. They also get more loyalty back because they think you give me the opportunity. And as you rightly said earlier, there's just not that talent. There's not enough talent to go around at the moment. I'm interested to touch on, you made a good point earlier about kind of how wrong do you want it to be? We're still in that point where there are issues with AI and it's, they're making decisions and they're running parts of our organizations. Yet people who work in these companies are just supposed to trust the AI. How do you go about building that trust, both in terms of within the system, but also internally with the company, but also with customers? How do you say, no, we've got to impart our trust into this because it's going to deliver?
So I think that trust is the currency of AI.
Yeah.
It's very hard to establish and it's very easy to lose. I love sharing this one project, and I think we talked about it on the podcast a few years back. And it's a machine learning project. It's nothing super sophisticated, but it was building a predictive model on top of patient claims data to see who qualified for a specific program. And when we rolled the system out, it totally failed because the end users who were expected to use it to make decisions didn't trust the model. And their incentives weren't aligned. And what we learned, not only were their incentives based off of their performance on that task, but our model was selecting patients that looked different from the ones they typically would have worked.
Okay.
And that's especially true of AI. It tends to find answers that sometimes defy intuition. And that's either a good thing because it's identifying a pattern that is valid that you really no experience with, or conversely, maybe it's really wrong.
Yeah.
And your way was right, but it's really hard to know unless you really understand what in the AI's process is triggering a certain answer. And so even on a simple thing, if you use a generative AI tool today, like ChatGPT, to do search, when you get an answer and then you see the citation for that answer, it gives you the ability to go in, verify, and make a determination of whether or not you're willing to trust that answer.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, and I think we touched on this. If you ask it the same question 5 times, you typically will get slight variation anyway. And I think as organized, so if you're looking at trust as the big, I love that quote you just said, but in terms of trust is obviously that's everything to do with AI. Do you think internally with organizations, that's a lot of their challenge there is actually trying to get everyone on board? Because going back to your point about that project, people just didn't believe or didn't trust what was coming out. Do you think now it's a case of there needs to be people specifically like AI evangelists, people who are actually going around saying, this is the reason we should buy into this?
There's not enough of that. And what I find is there's the individuals who, will on one hand say, oh my God, AI is great. I use it daily and I use it personally. Frankly, I fall into that category. But at the same time, if you ask those individuals, hey, do you trust other people using AI across your entire organization? You get a resounding like, oh no.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
Yeah, right. It's like, I'm clever. I know how to use it. I know how to work around its limitations. But other people, you got to watch out for that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think it's such a refreshing conversation because I know you're working with these organizations day in, day out. I think your advice around, the analysts and people who may not necessarily think there is a career in this for them, I think actually you've really kind of given them some confidence that actually their mindset and what they're typically used to looking at, they should be those data stewards and actually someone who's actually focusing on the AI themselves. But in terms of next 6 to 12 months, if you had your kind of crystal ball, what do you think we're going to see? Because I think you touched on it really interesting. 2.5 years ago, we sat down in New York. It was, ChatGPT had just come out. Everyone was going wild. And actually now companies spinning up, we're having 30, 40 person companies with multi-billion-dollar valuations quicker than, any other organization to get to that point. But next 6 to 12 months, do you think things are going to take stock more? Are we going to see this continual kind of rise in the growth?
It's so hard to predict because there's facets where truly generative AI is becoming impressive. So I just, in my class, showed an example of a Hollywood trailer that was used to pitch a potential series that was generated entirely with AI tools. Now, mind you, there's a lot of human effort that went into create multiple different images, select the best ones, stitch them into frames, drop the ones that really were incoherent, right? There's still this human investment. So there's areas where you truly can have a production team of one for a certain level of fidelity before you then invest in, all right, let's get the film crew out there, let's do this the proper way. And it's unclear how much better these models will get. It's also unclear how much better the next generation of tools like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini will get over the coming period as well. But we're clearly reaching a point where we're saturating publicly available data sets to improve these models. And it's increasingly going to depend on proprietary content within enterprises to really maximize the utility of these tools.
Yeah.
There's a term I heard recently that has gotten me thinking a lot about what does the future look like. I think some of these areas are going to be busts, or some of these areas are going to be great, and they're going to need a ton of human effort in a different way. You probably have heard mixed feelings about prompt engineering. Is that a relevant skill? Is that not a relevant skill?
It was supposed to be the mix a couple of years ago. That was the big job. But actually for us, the recruiters, I don't see many at all.
And it's an extension of literacy, knowing how to tell a language model what you want. We're very ambiguous. Humans are so bad at asking for what they need. Regardless of whether or not prompt engineering as a skill proper is something that becomes a job or like a part of a job, I think knowing how to convey your intention is really important. But there is a term I heard recently that's really got me thinking. Context engineering, the art of selecting which knowledge assets are a trusted part of an AI solution's workflow. Now, that's a skill set that's going to continue to be relevant. And I'll give you an example. I have this workshop that I've designed around just learning to build trust in AI solutions. And one of the exercises I have the class do is try to answer the question of how many business decisions were based off of an AI hallucination in the past couple of years. And if you ask that question, give it a try. Your favorite, whether it's Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, inevitably you'll get an answer. You'll get an answer with a citation, a very specific answer. 47% of business decisions have been based off of a hallucination.
Wow.
And if you go to that website, you will see it citing from a lot of different reports, many of which are correct and valid. But this statistic, 47%, ironically, of business decisions based off of hallucination is in itself a hallucination, because there is no source material that you can find that you base it
Wow.
on. And so to bring this back to context engineering, what is that? That's really saying these language models are great summarizers, but how do you master what content you're willing to trust? What content you're ingesting into them that then become a part of the answer. If we're asking a question about Alex Hutchings, and there's a bunch of other Alex Hutchings out there, how does it disambiguate and know that I mean you in a specific context?
Yeah.
And so this skill set of being able to orchestrate these systems in the enterprise and being able to orchestrate what knowledge assets are trusted, rank them, build that sort of logic, that's an evergreen skill.
Well, you heard it here first, everyone. I think that's it's actually something I've never heard of. But you touched on an interesting point about the prompt engineering. That's a good salient point around providing more context to the query or the model. That's where we're getting deeper, aren't we, into that kind of conversation with AI, where we need to provide better questions and ask better questions to ultimately get better context and better answers back.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Cal, look, as always, it's been lots of fun. I appreciate you having such an open conversation with me. I think there's a lot to glean from this conversation. We'll make sure that when we release, we obviously tag you guys so people can take a look at what you and your organization are doing. But yeah, thanks again. I do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. It's been great.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Cal.